Okay, we're going to start on the notes from chapter 6. There's a lot of them in this first bunch, but some of you are working on this and you had an easy day yesterday, and so you can handle it. Some of you are going to be working on this first, and you're going to have an easy day tomorrow. So just toughen up and get through it, and you'll be okay. The Pharisees are the first group of people that we learn about in chapter 6. We're going to learn about several. The Pharisee means separated. And they tried to keep Gentiles out of Israel to avoid their influence. They went back to an idea of a nation separated, and not a bad thing is, but part of the Mosaic Law, and we remember what happens when the Jews intermingle with other nations. Solomon, with all his wisdom, had wives from different nations and allowed idolatry to come back into the Jewish people. So it's not necessarily an unreasonable thing for the Pharisees. But they did go beyond the Mosaic Law and created unnecessary rituals and rules and such. And we can read about that in the Bible when Jesus butts heads with them many times over these unnecessary rituals and all of these silly laws and very strict interpretations of the law, including, resting on Sunday. Well, they took it way, way too far, and Jesus calls them out on it. Okay, you pause here if you need to finish this slide. Otherwise, we're going to keep going on. The Sadducees. The Sadducees embraced Gentiles, the opposite of the Pharisees, and they tried to find common ground. They made friends among the ruling classes, giving the Sadducees power and government. People liked the Sadducees because they were willing to work with them and do things, whereas the Pharisees didn't want anything to do with them and wanted them out of their religion, out of their nation. But the Pharisees were jealous of the Sadducees because of this power and government. Pause here to finish the slide. Okay, the Essenes. These were a smaller group that lived near the Dead Sea. They followed Mosaic law and Jewish customs, but rejected animal sacrifice, something that was still being done during the time that Jesus lived. Many of the Essenes were celibate. They treated people equally, so there were no slaves, unlike in the Jewish nation of Israel. There was no slavery there. And they were also pacifists. Some people think John the Baptist spent time with them, but no one really knows for sure. Okay, pause here. Alright, the Essenes, they owned all of their goods in common. There was no money. They bartered for things. In many ways, sounds like socialism, but it kind of was. It was a type of commune. And on a small scale, with very simple living, that can work. But in practice, it gets much more challenging when you try to live more complicated lives with technology and such. And when you outgrow the system, it's hard to have a commune with hundreds of thousands of people. know what each person should do that's fair for the entire society because it's so large. One thing interesting about the Essenes are that they're never mentioned in the Bible. Never ever. Okay, the next slide we're going to learn about Herod the Great. So pause here if you need to. Herod the Great, who wasn't actually so great. He was not a Jew. He might have been half Jewish. He created a story of Jewish origins and being part of the Davidic line, but this wasn't true. He rebuilt the temple, took many wives, and paid temple priests for their support. He basically bribed them. And if you remember from the reading, Herod stormed into Israel and massacred people in order to take over being king. And actually, that may not have been in this part of the reading, but we will read about it more later on. What maybe it was. I can't remember where you guys are at. But anyway, the reason that he's called great isn't because of his military prowess and subduing the Jewish people and accepting his rule. They probably hated him for that. But after it was over, he was a shrewd businessman and knew how to work the government. So he created a time of economic prosperity. The economy was good. And because of that, he became known as Herod the Great, despite the horrible atrocities that he committed. Remember, this is the Herod that ordered all of the small children killed trying to find Jesus. This guy was not good. He was not great. Okay, pause here if you need to. The Samaritans. You should recognize this name from the famous parable of the Good Samaritan. They descended from the northern tribes of Israel, so they had their roots in the Jewish nation, and they intermingled with the Assyrians after the Assyrians conquered them. And so their religious traditions grew separately from the Jews because the Samaritans were able to stay near Jerusalem instead of going into exile when the Assyrians beat them, conquered them. And so the peoples were separated, and so obviously their religious traditions became different. But the Jews considered them heretics, kind of like traitors, I suppose. So you can pause here. Okay, the top part is the same as what you had in the bottom of the last slide. And if you remember in the Bible how it was a huge deal that Jesus talked with the Samaritan woman at the well, and how profound the parable of the Good Samaritan was. People were not expecting the Samaritan to be the hero of the parable. There are about 800 Samaritans left today as of 2018. I looked it up. A large number of the Samaritans became Christian. The Samaritans accepted the teachings of Christ much more easily than the Jews did. But Many more of the Samaritans were killed from persecution from several countries over time. In 1919, there were only 141 Samaritans. It's quite amazing that they were able to repopulate so few. Pause here to finish this slide. Pax Romana. It means the Roman peace. This was a peaceful time when travel was easier and independent countries were now united under one law and one currency. This was an excellent time in history. The Romans sometimes were conquerors, but they knew how to please the people that they conquered by leaving them in charge, allowing them to practice their own religion, and basically be nice to them. And so now they were all united under Roman law and under Roman currency, and they had to pay taxes to Rome. But you didn't have to worry about traveling through countries where there would be robbers or people that would um, hurt you just because you were from another country, because everyone was under the protection of Rome. Pause it here. The spread of the Jewish religion. The Jewish religion became quite popular, and people knew about it even if they didn't follow it. And there were a lot of people called God-fearers, those who did not fully practice the Jewish faith. They were probably not circumcised, but they did attend the synagogue and read the Hebrew scriptures. They believed in the one true God. So they were on their way to believe in the Jewish faith fully, but something was holding them back. And perhaps it was because they were going to be among the first to be converted to Christianity. They had an easier time with accepting the teachings of Christ because they were not fully indoctrinated with the beliefs of the Pharisees and Sadducees. I think this is the last slide, so you can pause it here to make sure you get all of this written down before the video ends. And you guys have a great afternoon.